Every president believes the White House is the safest place on earth, until the day it isn't. On the morning of September 10, 2025, a barefoot stranger walked calmly across the South Lawn, past every layer of Secret Service security, and stopped right in front of Martha Keene, a 56-year-old East Wing administrator who would never forget his face. He spoke one sentence that made no sense until hours later, when news broke that Charlie Kirk, America's most outspoken conservative educator, was dead. Since that day, no one has explained how the man got in, or who he really was. Prophet, messenger, or something far greater? Before we continue, please like if you believe some moments are more than coincidence, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to the exact minute everything changed. It was the second week of September 2025, one of those weeks in Washington when the weather couldn't decide if it was done with summer. The air above Pennsylvania Avenue shimmered faintly, and the trees on the South Lawn still held their color, though a few brown leaves had begun to gather against the curbs. At the northwest gate of the White House, a line of staff waited with ID badges ready, and the metal detectors pulsed with their steady electronic heartbeat. Martha Keene arrived a few minutes early, as she always did, cardigan draped over one arm, the same tan purse she had carried for 15 years pressed against her side. At 56, she had become a fixture of the East Wing, one of those employees everyone knew by sight, even if they didn't know exactly what she did. Her job title was Administrative Coordinator for Visitor Services, which meant she managed the constant flow of credentials, sign-ins, and scheduling paperwork that passed between offices every day. She knew which printer jammed when humidity rose, which cabinet still smelled faintly of lemon polish from the Clinton years, and which guard at the northwest gate would let her through with a simple nod. The guard said good morning. She smiled, scanned her badge, and crossed the marble threshold where the air turned cooler and quieter. She loved that first minute inside, the particular silence of the building before the rush began. From the corridor she could see into the courtyard garden where a maintenance worker watered the hedges in the pale light, the smell of disinfectant mixed with the faint perfume of waxed floors. She thought, as she often did, that this was the safest place in America. Cameras on every wall, agents at every door, every sound accounted for. Her workspace sat in a corner office facing the South Lawn. A small window overlooked the fountain, and next to it sat a steel desk layered with forms, pens, and sticky notes. The computer monitor hummed softly. Beside it stood a picture of her husband, Thomas, smiling in their old Maryland backyard, long before the diagnosis, before the chemo that had changed everything. She still touched the frame each morning when she sat down, like a small ritual of continuity. By 9 o'clock, the East Wing was fully alive. Footsteps echoing down marble, phones ringing, printers spitting out memos. Martha moved through her routine, verifying IDs, answering calls from the scheduling team, collecting courier envelopes for the executive office. Every action followed muscle memory, but beneath the calm surface she felt the dull fatigue that came with middle age, the stiffness in her fingers, the careful lift of her knees as she bent to plug in the charger. She told herself that discipline was a form of gratitude, that showing up every day kept her from thinking too much about what she had lost. At 9:36 a.m., the lights flickered. A soft clicking came from the fluorescent fixtures above her head, followed by a brief hum from the HVAC vents. The wall clock stopped at 9:37, the second hand frozen halfway between ticks. Her monitor froze mid-email. At first she thought it was another software update, but the air felt heavier, cooler, like the building had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. From down the hall came voices, someone laughing it off, someone saying, "Power glitch, check your cords." She waited, watching the green cursor blink motionless on the screen. Then she noticed the smell. It wasn't electrical, not ozone or burning plastic, but something warm, faintly metallic, the scent of candle wax and iron. She turned toward the vent, sniffed again, and frowned. The smell was stronger by the window. When she pulled the shade halfway, sunlight spilled across the desk, pale and dusty, and in that strip of light she saw movement outside, something slow, deliberate. A man was walking across the South Lawn fountain path, barefoot. His skin looked pale in the glare, his steps measured, unhurried. He wore off-white linen trousers and a loose shirt that moved lightly against him in the wind. He didn't seem lost or desperate, just strangely certain, like a person walking toward an appointment. Two uniformed officers at Post E stood 30 yards away, not moving, not even turning their heads. Their radios hung silent. Martha's heart kicked. She reached for the phone, pressed the line for the command post. "Possible intruder," she said quickly. "Male, barefoot, near the South Lawn fountain." The operator asked for location confirmation, then paused. "Ma'am, nothing on the feed. You sure it's not maintenance?" "There's no maintenance scheduled," she said. Her voice came out flatter than she intended. She turned back to the window. The man had reached the shadow of the east colonnade. He lifted his head slightly, as though hearing her through the glass. And in that instant, the sunlight flashed so bright she had to shield her eyes. When she looked again, the walkway was empty. The operator repeated that cameras showed no movement. She thanked him, hung up, and tried to steady her breathing. Maybe she'd seen a reflection, maybe heat distortion from the pavement, but she couldn't shake the image of his calm expression or the way the air had gone still when he looked toward her. She sat back down, intending to write a quick report for her supervisor. When she switched the printer on, it sputtered once and began feeding a blank page. She reached for it as it slid out, thinking the toner had failed, but faint pressure marks ran across the paper, letters pressed without ink, visible only when tilted to the light. "He walks without sound." The words seemed almost etched by weight, not written. She stared at them until her vision blurred, then fed the sheet back through to test it again. The next page came out normal. She kept the first one, folded it once, and slipped it under her notebook. At 10 o'clock, the building returned to its rhythm. The IT department sent an all-staff note confirming a short network time desync. No hardware damage reported. Martha finished assembling the visitor packets for an agriculture briefing and carried them to the drop station. Along the hallway, televisions replayed last night's news about Midwest floods and fuel prices. Everything sounded ordinary again, but she caught herself checking each digital clock she passed. Everyone she saw showed the correct time. Only hers on the desk remained stuck at 9:37. By late morning, sunlight had shifted across the floor, making the marble veined with yellow light. A courier stopped by for signatures, joking about how these old buildings still felt haunted. She smiled politely, handed him the folder, and watched him disappear into the next office. When she turned back, her monitor flashed once, screen dark, then returned to normal. She told herself not to make it bigger than it was. People saw strange things when they were tired. Grief had its own logic. It came back through small cracks when you weren't looking. But as she typed, she couldn't stop thinking of those bare feet crossing government stone, leaving no trace. She wondered if anyone else had seen him, if security had quietly found and detained the man without public notice, or if, unthinkably, he had never been there at all. Outside, the flag above the executive residence stirred in a light wind. Inside, the hum of the vents steadied again. Martha drew a slow breath, pressed save on her work, and watched the timestamp appear. 9:37 a.m., unchanged. She didn't touch the clock. She only listened to the faint buzz of fluorescent light overhead and the soft shuffle of footsteps somewhere down the corridor, moving nearer, then fading, as if the building itself were remembering how to breathe. The faint hum of the building returned first, low and steady like a deep exhale through the vents, followed by the measured rhythm of shoes against marble. For a moment, the east wing sounded normal again, the way it always did near midday when briefings were in motion and the scent of coffee from the staff kitchen drifted through the hall. Martha Keene adjusted the collar of her cardigan, trying to push away the feeling that time itself was slightly misaligned. Her clock still showed 9:37, the cursor on her screen blinking patiently as if it too were waiting for permission to move forward. She told herself to let it go. She had forms to deliver, signatures to chase. Yet a restless unease kept her glancing toward the corridor every few minutes, half expecting to see someone, or something, standing there. But what happened next would silence even the doubters. At 11:07, the intercom crackled with a short notice. "Maintenance sweep, East Wing Corridor 3 through 5. Please remain at your workstations." The announcement carried the usual bureaucratic calm, but the undertone was different, clipped, tense, like whoever read it was reading it twice. Martha acknowledged the call with a quiet, "Copy that." and returned to sorting the visitor packets, though her eyes kept drifting toward the doorway. The air seemed cooler again, faintly metallic, and the light had shifted into that thin white tone that appears before a storm. The first sound was not footsteps, but silence, the kind of silence that bends your awareness until you realize something is moving through it. Then came the soft rhythm of bare feet against marble, each step distinct, measured, echoing without haste. Martha looked up from her desk, expecting an agent, but froze. The man from the lawn was walking down the hallway. He appeared exactly as before, barefoot, linen trousers, the same simple tunic that caught the light along its folds. There was no sound from the security post beyond him, no hum from the vending machine, no voice from the phones, just his quiet progress toward her door. His expression was calm, not strange or threatening, simply composed like someone carrying news too heavy for words. Martha's heart thudded against her ribs. She rose instinctively, one hand braced on the desk. "Excuse me, you can't be here," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "This is a restricted—" The man stopped in the doorway. His eyes were dark, unreadable, reflecting the faint light from her monitor. He tilted his head slightly, as if listening to something deeper than her words. Then, in a voice soft but resonant, he said, "Do not fear what the screens will tell you today." The phrase landed like a code she didn't understand. Martha's throat tightened. "Who are you?" she whispered. He stepped closer, not threatening, his movements precise, deliberate. "A witness to mercy," he said. "Before the sun is down, the voice that divides hearts will fall silent. Many will cheer, but the silence will not be peace." Her body went cold. "What does that mean?" she managed. Are you talking about someone specific?" He looked past her to the window, the faintest light glinting across his cheek. "Every age has one who divides," he said. "When pride dies, the earth will tremble. You will understand when the time is right." Before she could respond, a current of air swept through the hallway, cold enough to lift the edge of her papers from the desk. The blinds rattled once against the window. The man closed his eyes briefly, as if in prayer, and when she blinked, he was gone. The air stilled instantly. No footsteps retreating, no door opening, only the faint electronic buzz of the monitors coming back to life. She stumbled into the corridor, scanning both directions. Empty. The air smelled faintly of wax and rain. Down the hall, an agent's voice echoed, "Everything all right, ma'am?" She nodded automatically, hearing how flat her own voice sounded. "Just thought I saw someone," she said. The agent glanced around, shrugged, and kept moving. At her desk, the printer light blinked red. Paper was jammed in the feeder. She tugged it free and found a half-printed visitor badge among the stack. It bore no name, no photo, no barcode, only an expiration time, 09:37 a.m. Martha sat back down, the chair creaking under her. Her hands were trembling enough that she had to fold them together to keep them still. For a moment she thought of calling security again, but what would she even say? A barefoot man walked through the east wing and disappeared into air? She could already hear the tone of disbelief. The maintenance technician entered moments later, pushing a cart of diagnostic gear. "Sorry, ma'am, just recalibrating the sensors," he said without looking up. "Power fluctuations all morning. Should stabilize soon." His badge gleamed under the light, ordinary and square, and somehow that ordinariness steadied her. She thanked him quietly and went back to her monitor. But as she typed, something deep inside her shifted. Not fear, exactly, but an awareness that whatever she had seen or heard was not finished with her. No one else in the building seemed to notice anything unusual. The chatter returned, the laughter from the press assistants floated down the corridor, the phones resumed their steady ringing. Only Martha carried that strange stillness in her chest, that echo of the man's words circling through her thoughts. "Before the sun is down." She tried to lose herself in routine, signing off the afternoon reports, clearing her inbox, printing new visitor lists. Each task anchored her to the familiar, yet every so often she'd catch the faint scent of wax and iron again, as though the building itself remembered. By the time the end-of-shift alarm sounded, her nerves were raw. She packed slowly, stacking folders in perfect alignment, unplugging the monitor, powering down the lights. Outside the office windows, the light had changed again, darker now, heavy with the amber hue of late afternoon. She passed a cluster of staff whispering near the elevator. One of them, a young man from communications, looked pale. "You see that glitch earlier?" he said to no one in particular. "Every clock in the hallway froze at 9:37. Creepy stuff." Martha's pulse quickened. She forced a neutral smile. "Must have been the system patch," she said, and kept walking. But what she didn't know, not yet, was that the day's meaning hadn't reached her. It was still traveling toward her from across the country, hidden inside the news that hadn't broken, inside the voice that was even now falling silent. And before the night was over, those words would come back to her, not as warning, but as revelation. The low hum of the ventilation system mixed with the distant clicking of heels as staff hurried between meetings. But under the ordinary rhythm of the East Wing, something in the air felt unsettled, charged with a tension that had no clear source. Martha Keene could sense it the moment she stepped back into the hallway, the faint static against her arms, the way people spoke half a tone quieter than usual, the way no one quite met anyone else's eyes for long. The sun had moved behind a thin veil of clouds, softening the light that usually poured through the tall windows into a pale silver wash. On the televisions mounted near the press corridor, muted footage of morning interviews ran in a loop, every image of Charlie Kirk met with polite nods and small smiles. Almost everyone here admired him. Even those who disagreed with his politics said he was sharp, young, necessary. Martha herself had watched him once on a live feed, impressed by how steady he looked behind the podium, how his words seemed rehearsed but not cold. But no one in that hallway could have imagined what was about to unfold. By late afternoon, the work tempo had slowed. Staff clustered around desks, scrolling through updates, discussing a rumor that Kirker's rally in Utah had drawn a record crowd. Someone joked that he should run for office someday, and laughter rippled like a nervous current through the room. Martha smiled faintly, though her thoughts kept circling back to the barefoot man and the impossible calm that had passed through her hours earlier. She tried to reason herself out of it, fatigue, coincidence, imagination, but the words he had spoken refused to fade. Before the sun is down, the voice that divides hearts will fall silent. Each time she recalled the tone in which he said it, measured, almost sorrowful, her stomach tightened. A light knock came on her open door. It was Janet Miller from scheduling, her colleague of 10 years, the kind of friend who never missed an excuse to share news. Janet leaned on the frame, phone in hand. "You see this?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. "Something's going on out west. His plane was delayed, or maybe something worse. Feeds are slow." Martha set her pen down. "Kirk's?" "Yeah," Janet said. "Communications says he never made it to the campus yet, but no one knows why." She hesitated, scanning Martha's face. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Martha managed a small laugh. "Just tired. It's been a strange day." Janet nodded, half listening as she typed another message, the blue light of the screen flickering across her features. Somewhere deeper in the building, a door closed heavily, echoing down the corridor like a faint drumbeat. The minutes passed slowly after that. Emails stalled, the air conditioning cycled off and on, and outside the windows the light began to thin. At exactly 5:42 p.m., the intercom system clicked once, the signal tone that usually preceded a minor update. Instead, silence followed. 10 seconds, maybe 15, before a voice broke through, not from the intercom but from the hallway television. "Breaking news out of Utah Valley University," the reporter's voice trembled slightly. "Charlie Kirk has been shot during a public event." The words fell into the office like a physical shock. Phones stopped vibrating, keyboards stilled, the only sound the mechanical hum of the printer finishing a sheet no one would collect. Janet gasped, covering her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Martha stood so quickly her chair rolled back into the wall. On the screen, grainy footage showed flashing lights and blurred figures running across a plaza. The anchor repeated, "No confirmation yet on his condition." The room filled with overlapping voices, people calling spouses, others trying to verify, a few quietly crying. In a place used to controlled information, the rawness of that moment broke every rule of composure. Martha gripped the edge of her desk, her pulse pounding in her ears. But beneath the noise, her mind locked onto one image. The barefoot man standing in her doorway, his calm face, the words that had seemed like riddles hours before. "Before the sun is down." She looked toward the window. The sky was bruising into twilight. Janet turned toward her, eyes wet. "He's gone, Martha. They just confirmed it. He didn't make it." The air seemed to compress. The scent of wax and iron returned faintly, though no candles burned. No one could have explained what happened next. Every digital clock on that floor blinked once, then froze again at 9:37 a.m. The monitors flickered. The fluorescent lights dimmed to half strength. For 20 seconds, the entire east wing held still, as if the building itself remembered something it couldn't speak aloud. Then, the systems returned, lights steady, fans humming, computers alive. Janet whispered, "Did you see that?" Martha nodded, unable to speak. She gathered her purse and jacket with slow, deliberate movements, telling Janet she needed a few minutes of air. She crossed the corridor toward the window overlooking the south lawn. Outside, dusk had deepened, and security lights shone against the white stone like patches of gold. In the faint reflection of the glass, she saw her own face, and for a split second, another shape behind her, tall, still, watching. She turned sharply, but the hallway was empty. Only the faint echo of footsteps somewhere distant, unhurried and soundless. She rested her hand on the cool glass. The city lights beyond flickered on one by one, patient and indifferent. Her throat tightened, not from fear, but from the weight of realization settling over her. He had told her, and she had not understood. Downstairs, phones kept ringing. Someone was already drafting a statement for the president. Somewhere, a staffer began to pray aloud. Martha stood at the window until the glass reflected nothing but the interior light and her own stillness. When she finally turned back toward her desk, she saw the blank sheet she had folded earlier lying exactly where she had left it. She opened it again, tilting it toward the lamp. The words were still there, faint but legible. "He walks without sound." And before she could take another breath, the air in the room shifted again, cool, fragrant, and impossibly quiet, as if the unseen presence that had passed through the White House that morning had returned only to keep watch. The weeks that followed moved softly, as though the whole building were learning how to speak again after a long silence. Life in the White House resumed its ritual precision, morning briefings, courier deliveries, the constant murmur of movement behind every closed door. But something invisible had shifted in the air. The corridors sounded quieter, the laughter shorter, and even the clock seemed to tick with new restraint. Outside, Washington moved toward autumn, the sycamores beginning to lose their first leaves, the evenings carrying that faint chill that always comes just before October. Inside, work continued as if routine itself could heal what people didn't want to discuss. The death of Charlie Kirk had already begun to harden into a national memory, a tragedy spoken of in the past tense, but for those who had admired him, especially here, where many quietly did, the loss had left a strange tenderness that felt almost personal. Martha Keene returned to her desk the following Monday at 7 sharp. She did what she had always done. She set down her coffee, signed in, arranged the folders by department, and checked her messages before the others arrived. But her movements were slower now, her thoughts half a step behind her hands, as though some invisible part of her had been left behind in that moment 2 weeks earlier, when the barefoot man had looked at her and said those words she would never forget. She had tried, in those first days after Kirk's death, to convince herself that what she saw had been stress, imagination, something explainable. But each night when she closed her eyes, she could still hear that calm voice echoing inside her chest. The voice that divides hearts will fall silent. Many will cheer, but the silence will not be peace. At first, she avoided talking about it. There was an unspoken rule in government buildings that anything mysterious was best left unmentioned, but Janet Miller from scheduling had noticed her distance. "You've been quiet lately," she said one afternoon while printing itineraries. "You were the only one who didn't cry during the vigil. You just watched." Martha hesitated. "I've cried enough in my life," she said softly. "I think sometimes we mourn differently." Janet smiled kindly, not pressing further. She wouldn't have understood. How could she? How could anyone understand that what Martha felt now wasn't grief, but something gentler? A slow, radiant awareness that mercy had brushed against her and left something glowing in its place. The official investigation ended sooner than anyone expected. Security logs were analyzed, digital timestamps cross-checked, video feeds replayed frame by frame. The reports all agreed. At precisely 9:37 a.m. on the day of Kirk's death, camera footage along the East Wing corridor was lost for 22 seconds due to signal interference. That was all the explanation written. No one mentioned a barefoot man or a voice in the hallway. The story was closed, signed, archived. But Martha knew better. Late in the month, a Thursday, so clear it almost looked painted, she returned from lunch to find a small white envelope resting on her keyboard. No routing number, no initials. Only her name, Martha Keene, written in blue ink, perfectly centered. She looked around the room. "Did one of you leave this?" she asked, holding it up. Her colleagues shook their heads. Janet joked that maybe she had a secret admirer. Martha smiled politely, though a chill passed down her arms. She opened it carefully. The paper inside was folded once, the handwriting firm and familiar, though she couldn't place where she had seen it before. "Mercy begins where pride ends." There was no signature. The paper smelled faintly of beeswax. She ran her fingers over the ink, feeling the slight indentation where the pen had pressed. Then she reached into her desk drawer and took out the other sheet she had saved, the one the printer had produced that strange morning. She held them side by side under the desk lamp. "He walks without sound. Mercy begins where pride ends." Two halves of the same thought. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees on the south lawn, she stood at her window again, coffee in hand, watching the faint shimmer of light on the fountain. The wind brushed through the hedges in small waves. Somewhere behind her, an aide laughed softly at a private joke. A moment later, the sound faded into the familiar hum of the vents. The air grew still, and the light on the water seemed to brighten, gathering in a way that made it almost translucent. For an instant, Martha saw him again, not in perfect form, but as a shape of warmth inside the light, standing exactly where she had seen him before. The linen fabric, the bare feet, the calm stillness, everything was there, if only for a heartbeat. Then it dissolved as the clouds moved across the sun. She didn't move. She just breathed, letting that quiet radiance settle over her. Whatever she had seen weeks ago, she knew now what she believed. It wasn't madness, it wasn't exhaustion, it was visitation, and deep inside her, where no one else could reach, she whispered a name, not out loud but in the silent language of awe. Jesus. The thought did not frighten her. It filled her with an almost unbearable peace. By the time she gathered her things, the building was mostly empty. She turned off her monitor, placed the note gently inside her planner, and walked the long corridor toward the exit. The security guard nodded as she passed, and she smiled, realizing that for the first time in years, she wasn't hurrying home to escape the noise of her thoughts. She wanted instead to hold on to the stillness that had become her quiet companion. Driving through the city at dusk, the lights of the Capitol glowed pale gold against the deepening blue of the sky. The radio murmured low, more talk of investigations, of divisions and reform, but she barely heard it. She thought instead about the barefoot man who had walked through the heart of power without a sound, who had said only a few words, yet changed everything in her. She wondered if others in the building had sensed him too, if some trace of that holiness still hung in the air for those willing to listen. When she reached her apartment, she poured tea and sat at the table beside the framed photograph of her husband. She laid both papers before it, the inked phrases illuminated by the lamplight. For the first time since Thomas had passed, she felt that he was not far away, that he could somehow see the calm that had finally returned to her. Outside, church bells began to ring faintly from St. Matthew's, the sound carrying through the open window like a small, steady heartbeat. She listened, smiling. She didn't need to understand the mystery in full. It was enough to know that in a world built on rules and noise, mercy could still enter quietly, barefoot, and change the air without asking permission. Sometimes the greatest miracles are not meant to prove anything. They come simply to remind us that love still walks the earth, unseen but near. Let us pray for those who still seek light in their darkest moments, for every soul burdened by fear or pride or sorrow. May peace visit them quietly, as it visited Martha, in the moments between words and the stillness between breaths. May those who hold power remember mercy first, and those who have been broken find comfort in knowing that they are never forgotten. Let compassion rise where division once stood, and faith return like morning light over tired fields. May we all learn to listen for the footsteps that move without sound, and when we sense them, may we open our hearts instead of turning away. Amen. If this story spoke to you, take a moment before you leave. Share it with someone who might need to remember that miracles still find their way into ordinary days. Tell us in the comments if you've ever felt that quiet nearness, that touch of peace that words can't explain. And if this story renewed your faith in kindness, carry it forward. Let one gentle act be your answer. Thank you for watching. God bless you. Even in the places most guarded by men, grace still finds its way in through the smallest open door.